a small plexiglass window on this box so I can kind of see what the beans are up to relative to the epoxy. They float a little bit, not enough to rise above the epoxy completely, but I will have to cut off the first ½ inch or so to get down to where the epoxy is more dense. The beans on the bottom are full of tiny air bubbles, as I kind of expected. What I'm gonna do is resaw the top and bottom off so I can get to the cross sections of the beans. On this side, I blew out all the dust, and on this side, all the sanding dust is still in all the little holes of the coffee beans. The coffee beans I'm using are from my buddy's coffee company, Copper Coffee, and I'm gonna be giving this guitar to them actually. So the goal on this build is to use coffee beans, obviously, and as much copper or copper color as I can. So what I'm gonna do is try filling in all of these little divots with copper colored epoxy to start off. Another thing I wanna try doing is inlaying their logo on this ebony fretboard. I'm gonna start off by tracing out their logo with an X-Acto knife, and then I'll use a tiny chisel to carve it out. Got a little tape dam set up here, and I'm gonna try filling in all these little holes with copper epoxy. This is just copper colored epoxy mixed with silica powder, which is gonna make it easier to sand down. And so now I'll just fill in the carved out portions. Looks like an absolute mess right now, but I'm gonna let it cure and then I'll sand it back and we'll see how it looks. So I routed out this little edge along the sides so I can fit this flat copper wire in as a binding. It's not actually copper, it's copper painted aluminum. I'm just sanding the back side of it so that it will stick better when I glue it on. The thing is, since it's aluminum, when I sand the top flush, it's exposing that aluminum color on top. It's not ideal, but there's really nothing I can do about that. This, however, is some real copper sheeting. My buddy's had it in the garage for a while, just collecting cobwebs. So I'm gonna cut off a piece of it and try using it as a headstock veneer. Looks slick. Just gonna finish off the neck with some True Oil. I mentioned at the beginning of the video that this guitar was built from coffee beans from my buddy's company, Copper Coffee. So I want to thank him for sending those over for this build, and I will be sending this guitar over to them so they can put it up in their shop. We've been friends since like preschool, so I felt this was kind of a cool opportunity for both of us. I put a link to their website in the description. I drink a lot of coffee, and I can honestly say that Copper Coffee is some of the best tasting coffee I've ever had. So if you're interested, give it a try. It will also help support what I do here in my shop, so I would hugely appreciate that. As far as the guitar goes, I think it came out looking pretty awesome. The shape is like a modified Explorer look. One thing I'm sure a lot of you are wondering is why I didn't flood coat the top and bottom of the guitar to give it a perfect finish. And I gave it some consideration, but it's not every day that I build a guitar that smells this good. If you're within like 10 feet of this guitar, you can smell it. It was also kind of nice just building it because the shop smelled like coffee all the time. But I wanted to keep that aspect of this guitar, and I also think that the contrast of polished epoxy and dull coffee beans adds an interesting kind of textured look to the body. So I decided to go that route. Although on the back side, you'll see here this portion never got cut when I resawed it. So some of those beans are still completely submerged, but it adds an interesting look, I guess. And also, according to my research, take it for what it is, the coffee beans should not decompose or rot over time. They should stay relatively the same as they are right now, but that's just another thing that, time will tell. I tried a lot of new things on this build, which was pretty fun. The metal binding was a bit of a hassle to get seated down properly, but I think it turned out looking pretty good. Epoxy inlays also look pretty good, so I think that might be something I'll mess around with more in the future. And the copper veneer on the headstock turned out really good, although it's sort of developed some like markings on it, and they don't really buff out. Initially, when I finished the headstock, it looked perfect. There was no blemishes or anything. But after a few days of handling it, it's got some of these marks on it. And if I were to guess, it's some kind of oxidization going on. Maybe from where my hands have touched it. Copper doesn't rust to my knowledge, so I'm kind of anxious to see what it looks like in a month or so, or even like 10 years down the road. But it could have been worth putting a clear coat on. We'll see. One of the goals was to use as much copper on this guitar as possible, and so the hardware is all Schaller aged copper. Not too much else to say, so I will get to the demo. As always, you can follow my work on Instagram at Brosart.
you.